Great Responsibility, Chapter 5, Verses. Piper slipped on her mask and slipped back into the room, climbing silently down the pillar she had used to get into the ceiling. She spotted Claw pointing his blaster hand at a group of terrified students. "Hey! Didn't your mother ever teach you to play nice?" She shot a line of webbing, catching Claw's blaster, and redirected the blast so that it hit Claw in the face. Disoriented, he staggered until he ran smack into the pillar he was standing next to. Spider-Girl giggled. "Ooh, I bet it stinks to be you." Then again, could just be the suit. Haven't had a chance to watch it this week. Spidey glanced around and spotted Thundra menacing a tall boy with glasses. The arachnid leapt at the warrior woman. "Hey, little Miss Muffet, I hear you're scared of spiders." She kicked Thundra and caught the boy before setting him down with a grin. She thought she heard Wizard say something, but she was too busy dealing with an angered Thundra to pay attention to him. Claw had recovered, and he and Thundra were attempting to land a hit, but Spidey was too quick for them. Wizard levitated several tables and prepared to throw them at her, but she was ready. As Claw fired again, she shot another line of webbing and pulled hard, redirecting it to slam into Thundra, who went flying into the counter. She then swung hard and smashed Claw into the wall of tables Wizard surrounded himself with. As Claw collapsed, Wizard threw the tables at Spidey. She ducked, then flipped up onto one of them, leaping from one to another. "Looks like I'm off to see the Wizard." She flipped and leapt from table to table before grabbing one of them with both web shooters and slamming it and him into the wall. She grinned under her mask. "Take that!" She heard a cracking noise behind her and turned to see Thundra pulling herself up, her hair dripping with mashed potatoes. Piper giggled a bit. "You know, that is a great look on you." Thundra roared and shattered the counter. Spidey leapt up and shot 2 web lines. But before they could latch onto Thundra, she grabbed them and smacked Spidey into the ground. It hurt like hell, and the force of it knocked the wind out of her. Thundra rushed forward, and MJ, looking scared but determined, kicked a plate of miraculously intact green jello into Thundra's path. Thundra slipped and slammed into a nearby pile of tables and chairs. MJ grinned and pointed her phone's camera at the fallen villain. "This'll be my first front-page story." Before she could say anything else, a wave of sound knocked the phone out of her hand. Harry rushed over to defend her as Spidey began to stir. "Leave her alone." Spidey pulled herself up just in time to see Harry get knocked back and out by Claw. "This school is full of would-be heroes." Spidey leapt and kicked Claw in the jaw, knocking him down and out. She whirled and grabbed Thundra's wrist as she tried to punch the arachnid. "You want to dance, Thundy?" Spidey quickly wrapped the warrior from head to toe in webbing, listening to her muffled cursing. The students were cheering, but several of them screamed as they were lifted off the ground. This time, Spidey heard Wizard as he seemed to mutter to himself. "Floating hostages. Spider-Girl won't dare attack." Spidey grabbed Thundra, who was still struggling to get out of the webbing, and made to throw her at Wizard, who yelped and gathered the hostages in front of himself. Spidey dropped the struggling warrior and dove under the Wizard and the teens. "You should always make sure your back door is locked," she said, and shot 2 web lines, catching Wizard in the back and smacking him into a pile of tables and chairs. She swung up to the ceiling as Wizard pulled himself out of the pile. Spidey kicked him in the face, sending him flying out the double doors of the cafeteria. Her momentum carried her out the doors after Wizard. She paused to take a breath. "Spidey!" Spider-Girl turned and saw Flash Thompson walking down the hall. "Oh, wow, it really is you! I'm your biggest fan!" He pointed to his shirt, which was emblazoned with Spider-Girl's mask. "Let me help you." Spidey grinned slightly under her mask. She had been taught how to work revenge, after all. She did live with the Black Widow. "Sure." Spidey opened a nearby locker and gestured Flash to step inside. "Go right ahead. Wait here. When I signal you, leap out and we'll surround them." Flash grinned and did as he was told. She closed the door and stifled a giggle. She knew it was immature, but she couldn't help it. She heard the frightful four coming and leapt up to the ceiling, pulling a grate up and slipping into the vent behind it. The 3 members of the villain team gathered underneath her as she heard police sirens approaching. We aren't being paid to fight cops. They were being paid to fight her? By whom? The villains ran, and Spidey quickly made her way back to the section of ceiling where she had left her clothes. Chapter 6. What next? Piper climbed back out of the ceiling in a deserted hallway and raced back into the cafeteria. MJ was cradling Harry's head. Piper knelt down next to them. Harry? He didn't stir. Piper buried her head in her hands. This is all my fault. She heard footsteps and looked up to see Norman Osborn quick step up to them. What was she supposed to say? She couldn't think of anything, but her mouth didn't seem to get that memo. Mr. Osborn, I'm sorry. Norman picked Harry up and began to carry him towards the ambulance. Why apologize, Piper? What could you have done? Piper looked down at her feet. The intercom came on, announcing that students should report to their homeroom classes until further notice. Piper stuck her hands in her pockets and trudged down the hall. Worst day ever. She heard someone tap on the inside of a locker as she passed it. Flash whispered, Spidey, I'm ready. She felt a smile tug at the corners of her mouth. Yeah, okay, that helps a little. School was released early that day so that repairs could begin on the cafeteria. Piper's phone buzzed as she searched the parking lot for the black sedan that Happy always picked her up from school in. She glanced down at it and grabbed MJ's arm. The text read, I'm at Bellevue Hospital and it's really boring here. Room 22. It was from Harry. MJ, come on, we're gonna go see Harry. Piper dragged MJ to the sedan and yanked open the door. MJ grinned and hopped in. Piper slid in after her and grinned, leaning forward to talk to Happy Hogan, Tony Stark's and her personal driver. Happy, take us to Bellevue Hospital. Happy's eyebrows rose. Is everything all right, Miss Parker? Piper rolled her eyes. He still wouldn't just call her Piper. Yeah, we're okay. We're gonna go visit Harry. Happy nodded and drove. Soon they arrived at the hospital and were escorted to Harry's room. Hey, hero, how you feeling? Harry smiled, rubbing his head. There's still a bit of ringing in my ears, but they say I'll be fine in a few days. MJ grinned and hugged Harry. They were adorable when they got along, which wasn't often. Norman Osborn turned to Piper. Strangest thing, Piper. Those villains seem to believe Spider-Girl goes to your school. Do you know anything about that? Piper laughed slightly and joked, Yeah, I think she sits next to me in French class. Norman raised an eyebrow and Piper rubbed the back of her neck. No, sir, I don't know anything about that. MJ nodded in agreement, and Norman nodded slowly before turning and leaving. The 3 of them talked about who Spidey could be for a while. Happy tapped her on the shoulder after a few hours talking and laughing with her friends. Your father wants you home. Piper sighed and nodded. She turned back to Harry. I gotta go. Dad wants me home. MJ, you want a ride? Mary Jane shook her head. No, I'm gonna take the bus. Can't have you getting grounded because you were late. Piper rolled her eyes. That was one time. They laughed and said goodbye to Harry with promises that they would be back to visit him tomorrow. Piper slipped into the back of the sedan. She arrived on the main floor of Avenger's Tower to the sound of J. Jonah Jameson ranting on television. In a shocking betrayal of the justice system she claims to uphold, Spider-Girl today led known supercriminals in an attack on innocent school children. Believe me, ladies and gentlemen, it gives this reporter less pleasure than I imagined to say I told you so. It is the opinion of Daily Bugle Communications that the police should issue a warrant for Spider-Girl's arrest, and that nothing short of deadly force should be employed in the pursuit of Spider-Girl. Natasha nudged Steve and jerked a thumb at the doorway where Piper was practically steaming. Steve picked up Steve quickly turned off the television entirely. Tony made an annoyed noise. Hey, I was watching that. Piper rolled her eyes and set her backpack down with a thump to get her dad's attention. Tony leapt to his feet and rushed over to her. Are you okay? By the time we heard what was happening, it was already over. Did they hurt you? Piper smiled slightly as every member of the Avengers watched the pair. Natasha's eyes zeroed in on the spot of blood on her sleeve from where she had wiped her bleeding ear. Piper caught her eye and shook her head slightly. I'm fine. Those psychos never touched me. They were just after Spider-Girl. Tony frowned deeply. I'm starting to think Jameson is right about her. Leading a group of supervillains into a school? That's just asking for trouble. For someone to get hurt. Piper flinched slightly, but Tony didn't notice. Steve did, and looked at Tony reproachfully. Piper shook her head at him. This was part of why she didn't want her dad to know. He would panic. Tony seemed to notice that something was wrong. Are you sure you're okay, Piper? Piper nodded and sighed. Yeah, Dad, I'm just tired. I'm gonna go to my room and do my homework. Tony patted her on her shoulder as she turned back to the elevator. She went up 2 more levels to her own floor and made her way to her bedroom. She didn't even bother turning on the lights as she threw her bag across the room, its contents flying everywhere. She sat down on the bed and felt tears stinging her eyes. She tried her hardest to do what was right, to help people, but everyone called her the villain, even her dad. She looked down at the floor, and the eyes of her mask stared back up at her. But they were right. You can't even protect your friend, and you led them to the school in the first place. And if you can't even protect the people you care about, how are you going to be one of the greats? They can train you all they want, but it won't do any good if you're too thick to do anything right. There was a knock at her door, and Natasha stepped inside holding a piece of cake. Hey, kiddo. I know you're not okay. What really happened? Piper picked up her mask and explained the day to Natasha, starting with Fury's sales pitch for S.H.I.E.L.D. When she was done, Natasha looked her over. What do you think you should do? S.H.I.E.L.D. has made quite a few heroes over the years. Look at Hawkeye. But this has to be your decision. Piper nodded, staring down at the mask in her hands. Natasha hugged her with one arm before setting down the slice of cake on her desk and leaving her to her own thoughts. She sat there for a long while before making her decision. She set the mask down and began to change into her costume. Chapter 7. Welcome to S.H.I.E.L.D. Piper snuck out of the tower through her window and climbed up to the top of it, muttering to herself as she did. Roll out the welcome mat, S.H.I.E.L.D., Spidey's come a-callin'. She leapt from building to building as she made her way to the top of the Empire State Building. Fury's right. With his help, I can be better. I am through with this lonely loser routine. It was starting to rain as Spider-Girl raced up the building, the helicarrier in her sights. Time to show the big boys what the ultimate Spider-Girl can do. She leapt from the top of the building and shot a line at the helicarrier and almost screamed as the web line ran out before it ever touched the helicarrier. She swore as she began free-falling. She pulled the web shooter Fury had given her out of the small pocket on her costume. Fury's tech boys better be on their game or I'm street pizza. She fired at the helicarrier and watched with bated breath until it hooked on and she swung up, using the momentum from her fall to make it up to the top of the large ship. She whooped all the way. She landed on the side of the helicarrier and looked down at her wrist. Okay, maybe it's not too clunky. She was interrupted by a shrill alarm sounding around her. Intruder alert! Intruder alert! Spidey was forced to leap out of the way as several gun turrets opened fire at her. Oh, come on, this isn't a carnival game. Fury should be expecting me. Having no other choice, she began firing at the guns and knocking them down one after the other. The recoil on the new web shooter was astounding, but it also took out the guns in one hit. She wasn't looking where she was going and slipped off the edge of the carrier. She shouted in surprise and quickly fired a line as she fell, pulling herself back up to the top of the carrier, only to be surrounded by guns, all of which aimed laser sights at her. Piper froze, knowing that if she moved even an inch, she was dead. Then she spotted Nick Fury, who clicked what looked suspiciously like a key fob. The guns retracted, and Piper pulled off her mask, revealing messy brown hair and shining blue eyes. Your friendly neighborhood ultimate Spider-Girl reporting for duty, sir. Fury nodded. Good. Let's hope you survive the experience. Piper paled a bit and followed Nick Fury into the helicarrier. Chapter 8. Training. Spider-Girl waited in the darkened room as Nick Fury's voice echoed around her. This exercise will gauge your efficiency against superior numbers. The goal is to disable all attackers. You have 60 seconds. Oh, and just so you know, Captain America did it in 10. Piper frowned under her mask. Fury really needed to stop comparing her to her uncle Steve. She was good, but she was no Captain America. She leapt as the robots attacked. The first one missed, but the next one caught her around the middle. The rest of the bots dogpiled on top of her. She heaved and managed to throw off the robots before diving into the fray. Just to show off a bit, she started to pull out the moves that Natasha had taught her, mixing it in with the heavy attacks Steve had showed her. Unknown to her, several people were watching her fight. Fury smiled slightly as the top of one of the robots flew off and landed on Spider-Girl's head. A group of teens watched on a separate screen. A tall, blonde in a yellow mask, a buff African-American wearing a pair of shades, and a girl in a full-body white catsuit with a long ponytail all frowned at the mixed-match style of fighting. I completed this exercise in less than 20 seconds, the blonde stated. I finished in under 18, the buff teen bragged. The girl in the catsuit narrowed her yellow eyes. There is absolutely no discipline to her fighting style. It looks like she's mashed 6 different styles together. But Fury says she's good for the team. The group sounded suspicious. A boy raced up to the group. He wore what appeared to be a gold bucket with a red star at the top of the forehead. He glared at the screen. Why is Fury testing a new candidate? I didn't approve this. The cat girl laughed. Look who thinks he's still in charge. That is adorable. The bucket-headed teen glared and stepped closer to the screen. If Fury thinks I'm going to lead that lame-o in battle, the buff teen interrupted him, slapping him on the back. Yeah, in your dreams, your team leader. The blonde stepped forward, looking thoughtful. She is rough around the edges, but she has potential. Her moves seem slightly familiar, but I cannot place why. The cat girl nodded, stepping up to the rest of the group. Yeah, but really? She named herself Spider-Girl. The buff teen looked over at her, raising an eyebrow. What else could she have named herself? The cat girl shrugged. I don't know. Something that doesn't scream, hi, I have low self-esteem and identify with bugs. The blonde shook his head. You know what they say about a book and its cover, dude. The girl glared at him. Dude, I will clean this helicarrier for a month if she makes it. The boys raised collective eyebrows. Toilets, too? The blonde asked. The cat girl nodded. Toilets, too. They sealed the bet with a round of high fives as Spider-Girl finished off the last robot. Spidey panted lightly as she threw aside the last bit of robot. A hologram of Nick Fury appeared next to her. She grinned under her mask. Next? Fury nodded. Web parachute test. Red button. See you tomorrow. Piper frowned. Parachute test? What? But before she could get any farther, the floor under her opened and she screamed as she dropped out of the helicarrier towards the city below. She jabbed at the shield web shooter and almost cried in relief as she found the right button, and a parachute made of webbing flew out of her web shooter. She sighed, looking down at the city below. Well, that could have been more embarrassing.